show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, beloved, to another edition of Revolutionary Hoodoo, New Orleans Voodoo Secrets and Recipes. Understanding that all is truly and indeed a blessing. You can just see beyond the veils, for it is all just an illusion and a test. One of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. Come on in, all are welcome. Come on in. Greetings, beloved. Welcome, Chef Bougie. Come on in, beloved. Welcome. All is a blessing. Matthew Ferguson, divine all blessing, peace and love, joy and prosperity. Welcome. Come on in. All is a blessing. Yes. Yes, Marie. Greetings, beloved. Come on in. It's that season. Come on in.
Come back home to Africa. Just calling your name through the wind.
Come back home to Africa. The fatted calf and golden rain are waiting for you once again. Coming back to you. I'm longing for my family. Coming back to you. Come on in. Thank you, Diane Cameron Elam. Thank you, beloved, for the intro music. We honor you. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. Greetings to my live chat. Welcome to my blog talk radio audience at area code 845-277-9143. Come on in. Welcome. Greetings. Come on in. I'm waiting for you once again.
I'm longing for my family. Coming back to you. Out of bondage to now I am
Greetings, Oku. Greetings, Oshosi. Greetings, Arisha Oko. Welcome. All is a blessing. Your ancestors meet you here. All is a blessing. Come on in. Welcome. Come on in. Greetings, Sandra C. Welcome. Thank you so much for your divine presence, your being, your goddess energy, your God energy. Thank you so much. All is a blessing. Welcome. We will be forward momentarily. All is a blessing. Welcome. Come on in.
Come back home to Africa. Come back home. Come back home to Africa. Come back home.
Eshu Elegwana Kosi wearing Awo Olo Uto ni Iwo Ada Afando Osi Obatala ni Ita ni Ego Onilio Abane Shu. Eshu is the respected elder who vlogs, confronts, and uncovers fools. That one verse in the mysteries uses truth to own you. cause to scatter, to beat poverty. Obatala shakes rascals to have sacrifice. The owner of warnings is the one who is Eshu, Aboru, Aboye, Aboshishe, Ashe. We are ever reach our room. We are ever be accepted. We are ever alone. We desire purpose. So we say, Ashe. Divine all blessed peace and love, joy and prosperity. You are now sitting live with the Divine Prince, Pan-African Spiritualist, practitioner, author, and advisor, Elagoon, Oloye, Hoodoo, Obeya, Okur, sharing with you in all things spiritual, mystical, metaphysical, cosmic, evolutionary, revolutionary, healing, and holistic from a Pan-African Hoodoo world spiritualist perspective. Understanding that all is truly and indeed a blessing. You can just see beyond the veils, for it is all just an illusion and a test of one of the greatest divine mysteries of this life cycle. It is indeed my constant prayer, my mantra, affirmation, reverberation, reiteration, and it is my ever-living reality. All is a blessing is crucial to the very foundation of my understanding, my teaching, my walk, my works, my demonstration along this divine, all blessed life path and journey. It is how I, the Divine Prince, make sense out of all that we're challenged with here in our daily existence on Mother, Father, Earth. And it is my personal place of power and understanding, the place from where I begin, the place from where I realize and crystallize all my endeavors, understanding that I and I alone create and co-create my divine destiny, and I alone create and co-create my divine, all blessed reality. And so it is. Ashe. Today is Monday, December 7th, 2020, and I am emanating and vibrating with you and for you live, virtually, verbally, cosmically, quantum universally, from this working temple of the House of the Divine Prince, Thai Potions, Hoodoo Central, in this legendary, historic, beautiful, and most enchanted city in America, New Orleans, Louisiana, the land of my ancestors and those who came before me along this Hoodoo Obeah life path and journey, passing down the great Obeah stick along with the knowledge of the life-giving herbs, roots, plants, spirits, rituals, minerals, and indeed our sacred stories, So please join us at www.oursacredstories.com for your tour plus experience here in the city of New Orleans and in the neighborhood of this historic Tremaine. I'm always grateful, no matter what the weather, no matter how I feel, no matter what might be personally going on with me or for me at any given time. I'm always grateful for the opportunity to stand first on the shoulders of powerful ancestors and those who came before us. For without them, we wouldn't be here, not physically and certainly not spiritually. We wouldn't have our presence in this most present moment in time space without the empowerment of our ancestors and those who came before. But not just their body, their blood, their sweat, their tears, but indeed the volume of their information, the volume of their knowledge, the volume of their wisdom. And it's not always apparent to us right away. It's not always apparent to us immediately. Even when we think of being young and being children and the advice that our parents and grandparents would often give to us, present to us, we often don't appreciate the value of that until sometimes years later, or even when circumstances in life sort of present a correlation between the information and then the value. A common thing that I hear is Voodoo was in my family. Hoodoo was in my family. Root work and conjure was in my family, but no one discussed it. No one passed it down. Um, I hear that a lot. I often ask, how is it that such a strong and powerful tradition would be present in a family, in an experience, and not be discussed, not be shared, not be investigated, not indeed be looked into? And again, sometimes we don't value what we hear, what we see, what we're exposed to as young people, as teens, as tweens, as 20 somethings, as 30 somethings. And it's interesting that even in fiction, when we look at the healer, when we look at the griot, when we look at the storyteller, when we look at the sage, often the symbolic representation, even in fiction, even in cinematography, is older, eldership, people with some level of experience. I think about being a young person and being exposed to herbs and plants and indeed fruits and minerals. What we ate was a major conversation in the household that I grew up in. Some of my regular listeners know I grew up around a whole lot of stuff. But one of the things was the conversation, as many of us have had, about what we eat, what we drink, what we internalize, and indeed the overwhelming um, enforcement of outside ideals that is imprinted on what we consume and take into our bodies. And particularly in this season that we are in right now, this season of holidays, but also this season of COVID, which is causing us to really rethink not just our social behaviors, but in many cases, what we eat, what we drink, indeed, what we take into our bodies. I also have said for many years that the veils are thinnest, not at Halloween, but during this season. The veils are thinnest during the heart of the winter. The veils are thinnest during the heart of the quote unquote commercialized holiday season, because all we need to do is turn on any radio programming, any TV programming, any internet activity, and you're being bombarded right now with false information about wealth, about prosperity, about greed, about materialism, about value, about value. And particularly when you are young, I can remember being young and hearing and seeing others have what I thought was the great holiday, was the great experience that I wasn't having, that I wasn't privy to. And indeed, there are some darker stories to my father's behavior and to my childhood. But I also see it even as an adult. People sort of go into autopilot during this season, and we switch off our feelings, we switch off our emotions, we switch off emotional attachments to, and sort of go on autopilot. And sometimes I think, particularly if you have children, young people who you want to present, you know, a holiday, an experience, without them, much like my father did, forcing us to sort of go through this tunnel of separation and isolation. This can be a very challenging for people of any age going through this season, and particularly in the season of COVID-19. Many of us have already had to be distanced from family, distanced from friends, distanced from communities and events that normally we would be doing in the height of holiday season. And hearing the news talk about escalation, talk about things getting worse and not better. Here in the city of New Orleans, our mayor has threatened, to use the media's terminology, to sort of really turn things back a great deal if we don't get it together in a matter of days. in short haste if we don't bring it back to the center as it relates to this virus. As a magical practitioner and a holistic healer and a spiritualist, um, I often, not often, I always look at each and every day what powers stand up in the day. What's the astrological weather of the day? What's the ritual calendar of the day? And for me, that often then is translated into plants, herbs, roots. Sometimes things that are used, in your magic, used in your ritual, used in your gree, used in some of your other oils and potions and concoctions, but also in terms of what I internalize, what I internalize. And as I've often offered on this show, be very careful, be very careful. Be sure you know what it is that you're harvesting. Be sure you know what it is that you're growing. Be sure you know what it is that you're exposing your body to, and quite possibly the bodies of others. All plants don't operate the same for everybody. All roots don't operate the same for everyone. And so you should always start slow, temper your introduction to a particular plant once you have carefully identified it. Temper your exposure to it and gradually expose yourself to the new plant, the new mixture, the new concoction. Even when mixing herbs together, particularly new herbs, I start slow. Sometimes the introduction of a plant or an herb can strengthen or weaken the presence of something already in your mix. And of course, if you are one of us who are on any kind of medications, be sure you run this by your doctor, by your qualified medical staff. Some of these herbs, plants, roots, like black cohosh root, like licorice root, plants that we take really for granted, can interrupt the reliability of some of your more commercialized products. Um, I know for me, if I'm not careful about the combination, of herbs that I'm taking, my blood sugar will really drop. I mean, really drop. And I've tested this more than once. Sometimes I'm taking the combination of herbs. Sometimes I'm not taking the combination of herbs. Sometimes I only take them when I feel I need them, or I might see some elevation in my sugar numbers. And I'm now testing this particular herbal mix that I'm experimenting with right now on a good friend, so that I can also get a read on how it might affect other people. Um, and I don't want to digress too much into the politics of the day, but much as we are looking at, the antidote for COVID-19, and how these applications must be tested, and how the way and protocols by which these things are tested is very different in one country versus another. It's very different in one continent versus another. And indeed, food, plants, herbs affect us greatly on a very individualistic basis, and particularly when we're introducing something new. Um, I can remember being exposed to herbs and roots as a child, and not getting a whole lot of detail about what it was. I think often our parents and even our grandparents will apply things based on experience and what we know to work, what we've experienced having worked before, and then that is often passed down or utilized, and the details of it aren't often passed along, unless you're just, the precocious kid like I was, or the child that would indeed, ask questions. And sometimes we find that even then, grandma might not know the details of a thing. Grandpa might not be able to explain in modern language, what something is and why it is indeed effective. So I strongly encourage you to journal, 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 journal. Did I say journal? Write down what you're using, write down what you're taking, write down how much, if you can be conscious in the moment, be aware of the astrology of the day, be aware of what other things might also affect the outcome of any particular potion, mix, concoction of plants, herbs, and indeed spirits. Greeting, beloved JP Tarot, Keisha McCoy, beloved Arisha, thank you so much, everyone. Lily for being present, and Andrea Smiles, all my new listeners, as well as my continuous supporters. I appreciate you on both video as well as my Blog Talk Radio audience. You can always access the phone lines at area code 845-277-9143, 845-277-9143. Do press the number 1 on your telephone keypad when you're ready with your question, comment, or request. I'll be more than happy to unmute your mic and bring you into the conversation. But also know that you can follow the URL, the link that's in both the chat as well as scrolling at the bottom of the screen if indeed you have your webcam together and you would like to come on again as a co-host and share your question, comment, request, and indeed experience. Like many of you, and maybe not every one of you, I first heard about hoodoo, voodoo as a child, at least in my family, and particularly on my father's side of the family. It was a point of discussion. It had even been rumored over the years that my father was able to lock my mother in to a severely abusive relationship for over 35 years by way of voodoo, by way of root work, by way of conjure. And of course, we don't have any proof of that. But it's said that we went south every year, that we returned to Mississippi every year, that we had this trip into the deep south every year. One, to maintain, family lineage and family connection, but two, to supposedly maintain this conjure that it was always rumored that my dad had participated in. So the conversation of hoodoo and root work and conjure was something that I can go back in my earliest, most youthful memory and pull up, but also I have a timeline, if you will, of events that absolutely lead me to being here for you and with you today. Like many of you, which is how I started out this moment, I gained access to knowledge of motivation to, I should say, develop a greater knowledge through challenges, wanting to fix, repair, change what would otherwise have been a really negative upcoming childhood and possibly life. I've told many of you in the course of our private conversations that voodoo was my salvation. Indeed, I would have been a statistic if it were not for voodoo, if it were not for the ancestors. And my working knowledge of spirit practice, like many of you, began in the realm of spirit before I really understood the value of ancestors and how to activate that in my journey. But to fix, to repair, to change, to deal with homelessness, to deal with starvation, to deal with the lack of funds, resources, employment, to deal with the lack of love, to deal with the lack of support, I turned to hoodoo at a very young age. and gained a great deal of mobility in what to do, but also what not to do. By way of doing so, I offer you that if you can get assistance, seek it. If you can get guidance, adhere to it, humble yourself to it. No one should have to learn this in isolation. No one can truly understand and learn this in isolation any more than an individual can gain access to the knowledge, the global knowledge of all herbology in its existence without gathering from the experience and the practices and sometimes the notes of other practitioners. So the ability to pull roots, to defend, to protect, to open up gates and doorways is something that came natural to me from a very, very young age. One thing I do see that's different is that I sought strength, where it's not a solution. I sought empowerment as opposed to the shortcut to the solution. I sought endurance as opposed to the detour around something. I'm a firm believer in perspiration, moving through an event as opposed to having to relive it, recapture it, readdress it again at a later time. I remember when I first learned how to use peanut hulls and really found myself amazed at the ability to create and recreate a reality using peanut hulls. And again, I often journal, document, record, but also like to bring in other people into the process who also witness the manifestation, the demonstration of any particular application, but also to have someone like another practitioner who can also um, try your remedies, try your ritual procedures, and get a similar result from. It only gives credence, credibility to what you're doing. And one of the things that we are seeking to recreate now in our community, something that the Cuban community, the Puerto Rican community, the Brazilian community, and many others have had south of the border, is that community of practitioners in which to build from, share from, coexist with, in terms of ritual and ceremony, but also in terms of having a shared knowledge base. I think many of us are seeking sort of that community by way of books. And you've heard me say before, you can't learn everything in a book any more than you can learn chemistry in a book, any more than you can learn birthing babies in a book, any more than you can learn pulling teeth in a book. There has to be some environment, some space to apply and practice the information that we learn in a basic one-on-one understanding of something. We learn the words, we learn the language, we learn the tools, we learn the basic formula for things. Then we go into laboratory. Uh, I remember taking labs in junior high school and being exposed to the frog, you know, and the rabbit. First you have your book biology, and then you go to lab and apply that which you've been taught, you've memorized, you've added to your perspective on a particular topic. So having that community connection is something that I believe we still are striving to build and create and recreate for ourselves, particularly here in our communities in the U.S., but also in a more global, universal perspective. We still would like to see greater coming together among ATR practice globally. There's not a whole lot of room today for dissension and backbiting between one path or another, one tradition or another, when the very survival of indigenous traditions worldwide is bucking against organized Islam, organized Christianity, organized Judaism, and of course the politics that come with those main three religious systems. We see a need for space for something a little less um, sanctioned by the government, sanctioned by the mainstream, for us to grow. I also want to share that over the weekend I had an opportunity to view Lovecraft Country for the first time. I heard the talk, I saw the chatter in social media. I know they're in between the first season and the coming next season. So I took the time and I did a full marathon of the first season. It was very interesting. It helped to propel some questions that I've been asking in this room, um, and give them a little bit more fuel. And again, I asked that question: do we indeed seek more entertainment, more magical, mythical, um, Harry Potter-like demonstrations of magic, but just from an ATR perspective? Are we indeed looking for books, cinematography, movies, TV shows to support that which is the truth about our traditions? And I will say that I enjoyed Lovecraft Country, but it was so far removed from the reality of ATR and how ATR functions in the real world without the imaginative, creative license that uh, goes along with it. I did like the sort of opening dream sequence. It was a dream sequence where he introduced the idea of aliens and other life forms sort of interfering with humanity and sort of our evolutionary process here on the planet, Mother Father Earth. We've talked about that off and on in previous shows over the years. I would like to address that a little bit more on the notion, the idea that we find in ancient Egyptian culture, that we find in Mayan, Aztec, Incan culture, that we find in many world traditions that suggest and that speak to a higher evolved group, race of people coming from outside our solar system, coming from outside Earth, and interfering with the development, rightly or wrongly, good or bad, but interfering with the development of humanity. It takes me back to that Noah's Ark story a lot when I watch Ancient Aliens, for instance, when I discuss the concept with others about, the sacred text suggesting there were other life forms here or on the planet that were not otherwise recognized, particularly in the space of religion, until the last 20 years with the evolution in DNA technology. Growing up, I don't remember any discussion hardly of Neanderthals. Uh, the most basic, the Neanderthals, we heard about other humanoid or humanoid similar life forms, but not to the degree that we do today. And again, with the advancements in DNA science, like 23andMe, the ability to really look into Dravidian history, Neanderthal history, and of course, humanoid history. So I'm open and have been to that idea of, thank you, Arisha, sci-fi, and how it shows up in our culture. particularly spirituality and religion. But I also would like to look at where we're going, where we're headed. Can you imagine a day when we are better prepared spiritually, where we are better trained spiritually, and how to operate through the spirit realm, how to utilize psychic abilities, for instance, telepathy, for instance, energy work. And I indeed can see a time and a place where society, humanity evolves to a place that we may not be able to see in the present, save for those few visionary sages among us. I agree, J.P. Terrell. Lovecraft is that Western take on magic. And again, I only question it because in the Twitter, in the Facebook, in the Instagram, it was a big deal. You know, a lot of our astrologers and numerologists and tarot readers, I mean, it was a really, really big deal. And as I often do, I made a great effort not to be exposed to the program right away up until this last weekend. And so I went in it with a particular mindset, um, again, trying to answer that question. Is it indeed we are being fed this type of demonstration because we want to be fed this type of demonstration? Are we being fed this type of demonstration? You know, from an outside influence. You know, for me, it's an easy answer. It's an easy answer. Hollywood, TV, movies are not going to produce a lot of productions, not a whole lot of productions, that aren't going to be financially feasible, that aren't going to be worth the millions of dollars that go into producing these type of works. And the more sci-fi, the more Hollywood magic, you know, the more illusion and trickery in it, the more expensive these projects typically are going to be. So there has to be a payoff, you know, in terms of who's going to view this type of material and then who's going to support the sponsors, the commercials that run while these productions are being aired. And so it's a very different playground between entertainment and documentaries, for instance. We can assume the documentary. Let's take PBS, for example. Dr. Emily Zarka, thank you so much. PBS, Monstrum, and the opportunity to address the topic of zombies. Now, those of us who are familiar with public broadcasting, we know that they aren't necessarily dependent on television commercials. They are not necessarily dependent on the big box corporations for their funding and support. They're dependent on the viewer, and so they run the funding drive, you know, once or twice a year on PBS, on the air, radio waves, as well as on TV. They run the advertising for donations and offering and support of the channel. And so it's not like an HBO or some of the more commercial mainstream establishments and outlets in terms of where they draw their income from to produce and maintain the type of programming that we want to see. But again, when we think about a PBS, we expect it to be educational. We expect it to be informative. We expect it to adhere to and sort of stand up to some rules, some values that we don't. I hate when she does that. That we don't expect, your entertainment channels to sort of live up to. So again, I offer that if we don't support, if we aren't willing to support what's true, what's real, what's advantageous, what's evident about our traditions, our practices, then we can't always expect to see it supported in documentation in terms of film, movies, and TV. I love documentaries. Grew up on PBS, grew up on Smithsonian Institution. Um, love astronomy, astrology, you know, alien intervention. Love documentaries and understand the importance of documentaries to, again, support what we know and what we think we know about ourselves and each other. There's absolutely room for entertainment, imagination, people's willingness and ability to sort of relax from the rules and the norms of everyday reality. But I think there still should be equal space and place for both things to happen. The Goddess Initiative, beloved, I hear you. She's saying Lovecraft was coded, just like everything else on TV. They can't give it to us raw. First of all, our people won't accept that anyway. And I don't know, beloved, you mixing some things together there. It's real easy to say something is coded. Whether it's a TV show, a movie, you know, the symbolism on the dollar bill, you know, it's something about human nature that desires, that craves, that needs a certain amount of order and explanation. So we look for explanation, we look for order, we look for understanding, sometimes even where that might not exist, even where that might not be present. So it's real easy to say it's coded. Also, as someone who works in the entertainment industry, the environment is one that it would be very difficult to keep a secret, to keep something coded and hidden on set in the production of any movie, TV show, etc., without that being documented somewhere and the availability for it to be leaked and or told. Now, I do believe that in the creative imagination, an author or writer can choose to encode their own story into something, to infuse their own thoughts or ideas. And I think it's human nature, again, for us to do that. Depending on the author, depending on the cinematographer, they're going to, you know, translate purple in their view. Their purple might be a little darker than your purple. Their purple might be a little lighter than your purple. So there's always going to be, you know, the person's own beliefs and ideas and emotions sort of shedding onto that dramatic production. But I think it's a whole lot to say that it's coded, intentionally coded, and pulling from a place of truth. That would be a much harder thing to sort of pull off. And I agree, J.P. Terrell, with the confusing of entertainment with education. Much like the political environment that we live and exist in today, where people are believing that what the president is saying or what Fox News says, you know, is somehow truth-based, fact-based, evidence-based information, and somehow every other major journalistic institution out there is just all somehow, you know, fake. So I agree with you. I think there's a trending in today's culture, particularly here in the West, to sort of mix education and entertainment. We're much, you know, find it easier to watch the movie, you know, to see it on TV than to read the book or to study it. Once upon a time, that was joked about in television. Taking the shortcut to Romeo and Juliet, and sort of reading the cliff notes and somehow believing that you're going to gain the same degree of information, the same degree of truth or awareness. So I agree with you in that. I also believe that there are many cues that are given off in today's society, today's culture, that don't support education, that don't support knowledge. Again, it's real easy to point to politics because it's happening, right now. And so we have a man who's convinced you that science doesn't matter, math doesn't matter, medical information doesn't matter, numbers somehow don't matter. And so we have a half of our country who has presumed truth in what would otherwise be, a media event. What would have been 20 years ago just a commercial, just, someone deciding to choose to say or present something with their own slant on it. And so now we absolutely have people in our society that are confused about that. Absolutely, you can now find a place of support for either side of the argument, you know. And it's a sad day because it further complicates things for those of us who lack the skills, who really don't have what is necessary to sort of read, study, pull it together. Our children, for instance, are being exposed to and are having to make sense of. Now, I personally find children to be far more smart than we give them credit for. And children, even, when they hear nonsense, they can sort of detach themselves to some degree with the nonsense. But I don't know what's happening with our 20-year-olds and our 30-year-olds and our 40-year-olds who will absolutely ride a conspiracy theory, will absolutely ride, this made up stuff that's promoted in social media without any real understanding of how to verify what it is that you're hearing or seeing or being exposed to. Yeah, I hear you, Arisha, about the god Anasi. I hear you. Yeah, but children's minds are less cluttered with propaganda. I think we as children start to form opinions at a very young age, but please hold on, y'all. Somebody's at my door. Just give me a moment. I'll be right back. My apologies. I had to open my gate for a repairman. But yeah, And you know, JP Terrell, I'm not sure how we address that. Both questions. What I asked earlier, are we really looking for more truth, facts-based productions, or are we really looking for just more fantasy and entertainment? But the second question I'm referring to is, how do we then address the adults, not the children, but the adults that somehow mix entertainment and education and confuse the two? There are things that we give a pass to the 15-year-old, the 17-year-old, 12-year-old, the 10-year-old. But we're now talking about 30-year-olds and 40-year-olds within the supposed Black witch community that are entertaining imagination as real and are not even willing, in some cases, to learn the truth about voodoo, the truth about Akan, the truth about Ifa. And let's be clear, I'm not going to suggest that it's easy. Learning a new language, a new culture, a new tradition that has not been supported or visible in America, you know, it is a challenge for someone to do. But we must be willing to do it if we say we indeed respect and honor and acknowledge the ancestors and those who have come before us, upon whose shoulders we now stand. Arisha, I see that. Yeah, it's still a challenge in Hollywood. It's still a challenge in the arena of movie making and documentary making to see real, authentic demonstration of us in our community and our culture. And I'm sure could say the same thing about the Asian community that's underrepresented, the Hispanic community that's underrepresented, the indigenous community that's underrepresented. It's real easy for us to sort of find examples of where that's happening. But again, I think it still has a lot to do with what we will support, what we will turn on or turn off, what we will spend our money on, what we will go out and buy, rent, own or possess, And so until we stop being so quick to support that which does not support us, we will sort of continue to see some of the same themes and ideas repeated and regurgitated. Again, I'm grateful for people like Don Wildman, Buried Worlds, people like Dr. Emily Zarka, PBS Monstrum, like Sam Sheraton, Atlas of Cursed Places, who not only have a career-based drive and desire to sort of present a more diverse and truthful and authentic demonstration of world cultures and traditions, but we're also finding that they have a personal desire and need for that demonstration as well. And so when we, again, stop taking the gig just because it pays, or just because it's the shortcut to, making our ends meet, and really think about that which we are projecting to those who have to come after us, we'll then begin to see more truthful and organic demonstrations of who we are, but also what we really want to see in terms of film and cinematography. Let's see, yes, children are the closest things to God, children and old people. Children and old people, children and the elderly. Yes, indeed. Let me have your questions, your comments, your requests. My phone lines are open at least for another few minutes at area code 845-277-9143. 845-277-9143. It's a lot going on outside my house right now. Some of you know I sustained a little bit of damage during that hurricane, and so we're still addressing that. Some of the ceramic tiles on the roof, and also some of my boarding, antique boarding on the side of my house. So it's a lot of noise and a lot of activity going on over my head right now, and it's a little bit of a distraction for me. But I do appreciate you all coming out and supporting my show. I'm gonna return. I will be forward again on tomorrow at noon Central Standard Time, with a little less noise over my head. And I hope you all show up with me and meet me at 12 noon U.S. Central Standard Time on tomorrow. Always truly and indeed